For centuries, millions of men, women and children from Africa were stolen from their homes. They were forced onto ships, taken across the Atlantic Ocean, to the Americas and to the Caribbean. There, they were sold and forced to labor under the brutal system of chattel slavery. They lost their freedom, they lost their families, they lost their land, they lost their very lives. This was not a short chapter in history, it was a centuries-long enterprise. After the formal end of slavery, European empires, including Britain, carved up and ruled vast parts of Africa. They extracted raw materials, rubber. They extracted raw materials, gold. They took immense wealth that belonged to the continent and its people. These actions were not random acts of cruelty. They were part of a calculated economic system. This system built immense fortunes for European nations, while actively preventing the growth of African and Caribbean societies. The rules were designed to benefit the colonizer, not the colonized. Today, many nations that endured this history still feel the profound and painful effects. The word reparations can sometimes sound complicated or divisive, so let's break it down. When you break something that belongs to someone else, the right thing to do is to fix it or pay for the damages. This is a basic principle of justice we teach our children. When we apply this to history, reparations describes nations and institutions that caused and profited from slavery and colonialism taking responsibility. They must actively help to fix the deep and lasting damage that was done. It is a process of restorative justice, not a handout. For the nations of the Caribbean and Africa, this repair can and must take many forms. It is not just about writing a check to every individual. Financial restitution is part of the conversation. It is a comprehensive program for societal healing and development. This includes direct financial investment in public services that have been chronically underfunded, schools, hospitals. It can mean programs for land redistribution, agricultural development to restore economic self-sufficiency. It also means cancellation of unjust international debts that cripple national budgets, freeing up money for a country to invest in its own people and future. Beyond the financial aspects, reparations are also about truth, recognition, restoring cultural heritage. This means creating a formal public process to tell the full, unvarnished truth about the slave trade and colonial rule. It involves the return of stolen artifacts like the Benin bronzes from European museums back to their rightful homes in Africa. It is about building memorials and museums that honor the victims and educate future generations. Acknowledging the truth is the first step toward genuine reconciliation and healing the moral wound this history has left on the world. This is not a new or radical idea. The concept of reparations has been applied in other historical contexts. After World War II, Germany agreed to pay reparations to Israel, to organizations representing survivors of the Holocaust. The United States government made payments to Japanese Americans who were unjustly interned. South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, while imperfect, attempted to address the harms of apartheid. These examples show nations can and do take responsibility for their past actions. The call for reparations for the descendants of enslaved Africans is a call to apply this same principle of justice to the largest forced migration and enslavement in human history. So why should Great Britain specifically be at the center of this conversation about reparations? The answer lies in the undeniable facts of history. The British Empire was a dominant force in the transatlantic slave trade for centuries. British ships transported millions of enslaved Africans across the ocean in horrific conditions. Bankers, insurance companies, London, Liverpool, Bristol, grew fabulously wealthy from this trade in human lives. The profits from this system did not just enrich a few individuals, they fueled Britain's industrial revolution and helped build the economic foundations of the nation's global power. The economic exploitation did not end with the abolition of slavery. When Britain abolished the practice in 1833, it was not the enslaved people who received compensation for their stolen lives and labor. Instead, the British government took out a massive loan to pay reparations to the slave owners. This debt was so large that British taxpayers were still paying it off until 2015. Think about that. The descendants of the slave owners received a massive state-funded payout. After slavery, Britain's colonial rule over territories in the Caribbean, Africa, continued the pattern of extraction. The empire established political and economic structures designed to benefit Britain. Imposed taxes controlled trade, exploited natural resources, suppressed local industries, undermined self-governance. These colonial policies created dependencies and distorted economies that made it incredibly difficult for these nations to achieve stable, independent growth after independence. The wealth that flowed from the colonies to Britain is a debt that remains on the historical ledger, a debt never repaid. Therefore, the call for Britain to act is not based on guilt, but on a clear historical and economic record. It is a legal and moral argument. Those who profited from a grave injustice have a duty to help repair the damage. Many of Britain's most prestigious institutions have origins tied to that wealth. Banks, insurance firms, universities, museums. Acknowledging this history and taking concrete steps toward reparatory justice is not an attack on modern Britain. It is a necessary act of national integrity and a step toward building a more honest and equitable relationship with the nations it once dominated. They are visible, tangible problems that affect the daily lives of millions of people today. The economic damage has been profound and enduring. When you systematically extract wealth from a place for hundreds of years, you leave behind a legacy of poverty and underdevelopment. Many Caribbean and African nations struggle with economies that are still heavily reliant on a few commodities. Many Caribbean and African nations also rely heavily on tourism. This makes them vulnerable to global market shocks and limits their ability to build broad-based prosperity for their citizens. This economic legacy translates directly into weak public services. The lack of a strong tax base and the burden of international debt mean there is often not enough money to build and maintain high-quality schools, hospitals, roads, and sanitation systems. This is not because of poor leadership, but because these nations started their journey of independence from a position of extreme disadvantage. A child born in a rural community in Jamaica or Ghana today has fewer educational and healthcare resources available to them precisely because the wealth that should have built those systems was siphoned away to Europe generations ago. The social fabric of these societies also bears deep scars. The trauma of slavery and the divisions created by colonial divide-and-rule tactics have left lasting social challenges. Issues like land ownership are often contentious, tracing back to colonial-era seizures of land from local populations. The forced displacement of people and the destruction of family structures during slavery created a legacy of social instability that has been difficult to overcome. This historical trauma manifests in public health crises, from higher rates of chronic diseases like hypertension to mental health challenges that are passed down through generations. These are not individual failings. They are the collective wounds of a shared, painful past. Furthermore, we see a massive wealth gap between the descendants of the enslaved and the nations that enriched themselves from slavery. Family wealth is something that is built over generations through savings, property ownership, and business creation. The system of slavery and colonialism made it impossible for black families to accumulate this kind of generational wealth. Instead, their labor was stolen to build someone else's fortune. This historical injustice is a primary driver of the racial wealth gap that persists globally today. The lack of capital makes it harder for entrepreneurs to start businesses, for families to buy homes, and for communities to invest in their own development, trapping them in a cycle of economic struggle. A credible program for reparations is not a fantasy. It's a practical and achievable plan with clear, actionable steps. The first and most essential step is a formal process of truth and reconciliation. This would involve a joint commission, representatives from Britain, representatives from Caribbean nations, representatives from African nations to publicly document the full history and legacy of the slave trade and colonialism. This is not about shaming, but about establishing a shared, factual understanding of what happened. An apology without truth is an empty gesture. The second pillar is financial and economic repair. This is not about writing a blank check. It's about targeted long-term investments, a multi-billion-pound development fund managed by a joint trust. This fund would finance projects identified by Caribbean and African nations: modern hospitals and medical schools, upgraded universities and technical colleges, clean energy infrastructure, high-speed internet, capital for small and medium-sized businesses to create jobs and build local economies. This is about empowering, self-sustaining growth. Third, debt cancellation is one of the most direct and effective forms of reparation. Many former colonies carry enormous external debts, often owed to former colonizers or to international institutions they control. Interest payments consume huge portions of national budgets that could fund education, healthcare, and climate adaptation. Britain should lead a global campaign to cancel these odious debts. That single act would free billions and allow nations to reclaim economic sovereignty. Finally, reparatory justice must include cultural and educational initiatives. Britain should fund curriculum reform so every child learns the full history of the empire and slavery. Finance cultural exchange programs, create world-class museums, heritage sites in Africa, heritage sites in the Caribbean. Unconditional return of stolen cultural artifacts to their countries of origin. The path to securing reparatory justice will not be easy, and small nations acting alone face an uphill battle against former imperial powers. This is why a unified, Pan-African approach is not just a good idea, it is absolutely essential. When the 15 member states of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, act together, and when they align their strategy with the nations of the African Union, their collective voice becomes impossible to ignore. This unity transforms the call for reparations from a series of individual claims into a powerful global movement for justice. This united front can operate on multiple levels. Legally, a coalition of nations can pool their resources to hire the best international legal experts. They can build a comprehensive case to be presented before international courts and tribunals such as the International Court of Justice. By sharing evidence, legal precedents, and strategies, they can construct a formidable legal argument that Britain and other European nations will be compelled to answer. A collective legal action carries far more weight than a single lawsuit and demonstrates a coordinated, serious commitment to seeing this process through to a just conclusion. Politically and diplomatically, a Pan-African bloc can exert significant pressure within global institutions like the United Nations, the Commonwealth, and the G20. By voting as a bloc and making reparations a central pillar of their foreign policy, they can force the issue onto the international agenda. They can demand formal state-to-state negotiations with Britain and other former colonial powers, moving the discussion out of academic circles and into the halls of power, where binding agreements can be made. Unity gives them the leverage to negotiate not as junior partners, but as equals demanding what is rightfully owed. This collaborative spirit also fosters a powerful moral and psychological shift. For too long, the strategy of colonial powers was to divide and rule, pitting different groups against each other. A united Pan-African front for reparations reverses this legacy. It builds solidarity and a shared sense of purpose among nations and peoples connected by a common history. It reinforces the idea that the destinies of Africa and its diaspora are intertwined. This unity is not only a strategy for winning reparations, it is itself a form of repair, healing the divisions of the past and forging a new powerful identity for the future. This is a moral cause whose time has come. The fight for reparations is not about rewriting the past, but about shaping a more just and equitable future for all. It is a demand for honesty, not an act of revenge. It is a call for repair, not a plea for charity. The ultimate goal is to build stronger, more resilient societies in the Caribbean, in Africa, where every person has the opportunity to live a life of dignity and purpose. This means building nations with excellent schools, modern healthcare, thriving economies, and the capacity to solve their own problems. This is a future that benefits everyone, including Britain. We can all be a part of making this future a reality. The first step is to make your voice heard. Whether you live in London, Kingston, Accra, or New York, you have a role to play. Write to your elected officials, your Member of Parliament, your congressperson, your representative. Demand that they support the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice. Urge them to support calls for formal negotiations and debt cancellation. Public pressure is what moves politicians to act. Your letter, your email, your phone call, they all add up to create a chorus that cannot be ignored. Beyond politics, you can support the organizations that are doing the groundwork. Educate yourself and those around you. Read the books, watch the documentaries, and listen to the stories of the people whose lives are still impacted by this history. When we are all informed, we become better advocates for change. Journalists can tell these stories with depth and humanity. Students can demand that this history is taught fully in their schools. This is our clear call to action. Join the movement for reparatory justice. Do not be a bystander to history. This is not just a black issue, it is a human rights issue. It is a test of our collective commitment to the principles of justice and equality. We can imagine a future where the wounds of the past have begun to heal, where former colonies and former colonizers work together as true partners. We can envision a world where history is taught honestly. The echo of the chains has never faded. It is time for the world to listen and to act, not out of charity, but out of fundamental duty to correct a historic and ongoing wrong. To get there, we must stand together, raise our voices, and demand a concrete plan for repair. Justice is possible. A better future is possible. Let's build it together. The harm was systemic. The repair must be systemic. It's about more than saying sorry. It's about acknowledging deep economic and social wounds and committing to a real, tangible process of healing them. Join the Pan-African movement for reparatory justice. Subscribe, share, and take action today.